Boy, Tales of Childhood by Roald Dahl. Picture this. It's 1923 in a sleepy Welsh village. There's a little sweet shop that practically glows with possibility. Its windows crammed with enormous glass jars filled with bullseyes, strawberry bonbons, and licorice bootlaces. For a pack of young schoolboys, this isn't just a shop, it's their personal paradise, as essential as a pub to a regular or a cathedral to a priest. But here's the twist. Guarding this treasure trove is an absolute nightmare of a woman. Meet Mrs. Pratchett, a shriveled old creature with a mustache, a mouth that could curdle milk, and hands so filthy they look like she's been mining coal bare-fisted. Those grimy fingers, with their blackened nails, are the very ones she shoves into the candy jars to fish out your precious sweets. No smile. No warmth. Just accusations of thievery and orders to clear off. To young Roald Dahl and his gang of 4 friends, Mrs. Pratchett is the ultimate villain. They fantasize about payback, something spectacular that would avenge every grubby handful of candy she'd ever served. Then, one afternoon, fate delivers. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in their classroom, nestled among their secret stash of conkers and birds, eggs, lies a dead mouse. And just like that, brilliance strikes. What if, Dahl whispers to his conspirators, we slip it into one of Mrs. Pratchett's jars? The plan crystallizes quickly. Their target, the massive jar of gobstoppers. While one friend creates a diversion, Dahl, hard hammering against his ribs, lifts the heavy glass lid and drops the mouse inside. They bolt from the shop like conquering heroes, drunk on their own daring. But the consequences, well, those turn out to be more dramatic than any of them could have possibly imagined. Today, we're diving into Boy, Tales of Childhood, which isn't quite an autobiography but rather a collection of jaw-dropping true stories from the early years of one of literature's greatest storytellers. This isn't just a nostalgic stroll down memory lane. It's the origin story of a creative genius, the answer to a fascinating question. What kind of childhood creates the mind behind Willy Wonka, Matilda, and the BFG? The answer, as you'll discover, involves sweet shops and sadistic headmasters, magical summer holidays and shocking violence, a family overflowing with love, and a world that often showed none whatsoever. By the time we finish this journey, you'll understand how the wildest, most painful, and sometimes hilarious moments of childhood become the secret ingredients for everything that follows. You'll see that the most extraordinary stories often spring from the most unexpected places. The morning after the Great Mouse Plot, Roald and his crew approached the sweet shop buzzing with anticipation. But something's off. A sign dangles on the door, closed. Peering through the grimy window, they spot the gobstopper jar lying shattered on the floor, the dead mouse surrounded by a rainbow of scattered sweets. A chill creeps over them. Why hasn't she cleaned it up? Why is the shop closed? Thwaites, whose father is a doctor, offers a terrifying diagnosis. A shock like that could trigger a heart attack in an old woman. He points an accusing finger at Dahl. I'm afraid you've killed her. In an instant, Roald transforms from mischievous hero to potential murderer. The school bell shatters their panic, and they race to morning assembly, minds spinning. The headmaster, a towering man named Mr. Coombs, makes a grim announcement. Everyone to the playground. Now. As they stand in silent, terrified rows, the school door flies open. Out strides Mr. Coombs, and scurrying beside him, very much alive, is the tiny, furious figure of Mrs. Pratchett herself. The relief is immense, but fleeting. Mrs. Pratchett stalks down the rows of boys, scanning faces with her beady eyes. When she reaches Dahl and his friends, she jabs a grimy finger and screeches, "That's I.M. Here's another of 'em. There they are. That's the 5 of 'em all right, busted." The condemned 5 are summoned to the headmaster's study. Mr. Coombs is waiting, gripping a long yellow cane. But as he orders the first boy to bend over, a voice shrieks from the corner, Harder! Lay it into, I am. I am avenue it! It's Mrs. Pratchett, perched in a leather armchair, bouncing with glee, there to witness her revenge firsthand. One by one, the boys are savagely caned, while Mrs. Pratchett cheers like she's at a sporting match, turning brutal punishment into grotesque entertainment. When Dahl arrives home that evening, his mother notices him walking strangely. She discovers the scarlet and purple welts covering his backside. She doesn't scold or lecture. She listens to the entire story in silence. Then she calmly puts on her hat and marches directly to the school to confront Mr. Coombs. He dismisses her condescendingly, suggesting she's a foreigner who doesn't understand proper British schools. Her response is swift. She's removing her son from his school, permanently. This single act reveals everything about the woman who shaped Roald Dahl. His childhood was a fascinating collision of two opposite worlds. On one side lurked the rigid, often cruel English boarding school system. On the other existed the warm, magical, fiercely protective world of his Norwegian family. His father, Roald Dahl, was extraordinary. At 14, he fell from a roof and shattered his arm. A drunk doctor mistook the fracture for a dislocation and, with two assistants holding the boy down, yanked so violently that bone burst through skin. The arm had to be amputated at the elbow, yet Harold mastered life with one arm so completely he could do virtually anything. He had only one complaint. He could never crack the top off a boiled egg properly. This one-armed man and his brother Oscar left their tiny Norwegian town with nothing, determined to make their fortune in a bigger world. They succeeded spectacularly. Harold established a wildly successful shipbroking firm in Cardiff, Wales, supplying coal to the steamships that powered global commerce. He became a man of refined taste and intellect, a collector of fine furniture, a skilled woodcarver, and a passionate gardener. Tragedy struck when Roald was only 3. His 7-year-old sister, Astrid, died suddenly from appendicitis. His father, who adored her, was devastated beyond consolation. A month later, when he caught pneumonia, he'd lost his will to fight. He died at 57. Roald's mother, Sophie, found herself alone in a foreign country, with 5 children and another on the way. Any reasonable person would have packed up and fled to the safety of family back in Norway. But Sophie was anything but ordinary. Her husband had been adamant that his children receive an English education, which he considered the world's finest. Out of love and loyalty to his memory, she stayed. She would honor his wish, whatever the cost. This devotion created a stark split in young Roald's life. The school year meant rigid rules, bland food, and the constant threat of the cane. But summer holidays were pure enchantment. Every summer, the entire family undertook a 4-day journey to Norway, staying on a tiny, idyllic island. They lodged in a simple wooden hotel, where the toilets were just holes cut in planks over pits, but breakfast featured 50 different dishes. Their days were spent in a small boat, exploring countless rocky islands, swimming in crystal-clear water, and fishing for supper. It was a world of absolute freedom, adventure, and unconditional love, the perfect antidote to school's oppressive atmosphere. In this playful, loving environment, Dahl's mischievous spirit flourished. One summer, his older half-sister brought along her new fiancé, a manly type, who constantly clenched a smelly pipe between his teeth, even while talking. The children found him insufferable. One day, while exploring a goat-inhabited island, the man set down his freshly packed pipe to swim. Young Roald seized his moment, watched by his entire family, who silently approved. He emptied the tobacco from the pipe. He gathered some dried goat droppings, crumbled them carefully, and packed them into the pipe's bowl, covering them with a thin layer of real tobacco. When the lover returned from his swim, he grabbed his pipe, lit it, and took a deep, satisfied puff. There's nothing like a good pipe after a bracing swim. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the man let out a piercing scream and shot 4 feet into the air. His face twisted in agony, his skin turned ghostly white, and he began choking and sputtering, convinced he'd been poisoned. The secret eventually came out when his 7-year-old sister couldn't contain her laughter. As the man rose in fury, the children leaped off the rocks and into the sea to escape. This combination of shocking events and gleeful mischief runs throughout the book. Dahl's life was punctuated by moments of genuine pain that seem almost unbelievable today. When he was 8, his mother took him to a doctor in Oslo to examine his adenoids. Without warning or anesthetic, the doctor grabbed a long steel instrument with a tiny blade, shoved it high into the roof of Dahl's mouth, twisted it a few times, and a whole mass of bloody flesh tumbled into a bowl. He was simply stood on his feet and made to walk half an hour back to his grandparents' house. Another time the family went for a drive in their very first car, a massive Didion Bouton. His 21-year-old half-sister was driving with exactly 1 hour of lessons under her belt. Roaring down a country lane, she hit a sharp bend, lost control, and crashed into a hedge. Every passenger was thrown through the windscreen. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured except Roald. His nose was nearly sliced completely off, hanging by just a thread of skin. His mother calmly pressed it back into place, held it there with a handkerchief, and directed the shattered family to get the car back on the road and drive to the doctor. That evening, Dahl found himself on the nursery table while the doctor sewed his nose back on using chloroform as anesthetic. These experiences, joyful and terrible alike, burned themselves into his memory. As he moved from his prep school, St. Peter's, to the famous public school, Repton, at 13, the world only grew stranger and more brutal. At St. Peter's, he was so desperately homesick that he faked acute appendicitis just to be sent home for a few days. He mimicked his sister's symptoms so perfectly that he fooled the matron and school doctor, only to be found out by his wise family doctor back home, who sympathized and let him stay home for 3 days anyway. He endured characters like Captain Hardcastle, a master with a ferocious orange mustache who seemed to hate him on sight. One evening, Dahl broke his pen nib during prep. Not daring to ask the master for help, he whispered to the boy beside him, asking to borrow a spare. Captain Hardcastle exploded, accusing him of talking, cheating, and lying, and gave him a stripe, meaning an automatic caning from the headmaster. Despite protesting his innocence, he received 6 vicious strokes of the cane. At Repton, the hierarchy of power became even more formalized. The prefects, called boazers, could thrash younger boys for the tiniest infractions. New boys, known as fags, were essentially personal servants to older students. Dahl had to clean his study holder's room, a boy named Carlton, who performed inspections wearing a white glove, searching for a single speck of dust that would justify a beating. One of the most bizarre duties was being a bog seat warmer. On freezing winter days, a boazer would yell, "Fag!" and the last boy to arrive would be sent to the unheated toilets to sit on the seat for 15 minutes to warm it up before the boazer used it. Then there was Repton's headmaster himself, a man who delivered savage beatings to boys, ordering them to kneel over his sofa while he slowly administered strokes, pausing between each one to fill and light his pipe and lecture the boy on sin. After the beating, he'd provide a basin and towels so the boy could wash away the blood before pulling his trousers back up. This same man, Dahl notes with profound irony, later became the Archbishop of Canterbury, the man who crowned Queen Elizabeth II. For Dahl, the hypocrisy of someone preaching mercy and forgiveness while practicing such cruelty made him question religion and authority altogether. But even in this harsh world, there were moments of unexpected light. There was Corkers, the eccentric math teacher who never actually taught math. Instead, he'd have the class solve the Times crossword, or demonstrate how tissue paper folded 50 times would be thick enough to reach the sun. His most famous trick was suddenly pretending someone had passed gas, yelling, "Use door as fan, open all windows," which was the signal for the entire class to create chaos while he serenely walked out, not to be seen again for the rest of the day. And most importantly for his future, there were the chocolates. Periodically, the great chocolate company Cadbury would send a gray cardboard box to each boy containing 12 experimental chocolate bars. The boys were supposed to taste each one, rate it, and write comments. For Dahl, this was revelatory. He began daydreaming about inventing the perfect chocolate bar, imagining a secret inventing room in the Cadbury factory. It was a dream that, 35 years later, would blossom into Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. As his time at Repton ended, Dahl knew he didn't want Oxford or Cambridge. He craved adventure, faraway lands. He wanted to work for a company that would send him to Africa or China. He applied for and, against all odds, secured a coveted position with the Shell Company. After 2 years of training in England, he was told he was being posted to Egypt. Dahl protested. "It's too dusty," he said, to the director's astonishment. What he really wanted was jungle, lions and elephants. The company, surprisingly, relented. A week later, he received a new posting, East Africa. He was ecstatic. At 20 years old, he sailed from London, leaving his childhood behind. He was headed for a life of adventure, in a world of black mambas, malaria, and upcountry safaris, a world that would eventually lead him into the Royal Air Force as a fighter pilot in World War II. But, as he notes at the book's end, that's another story altogether. The story of Boy is about how all these ingredients, the love and the pain, the mischief and the magic, the brutal teachers and the brilliant mother, all combined to forge the mind of a master storyteller. When you finish Boy: Tales of Childhood, you're left with a profound sense of wonder, not just at the wild and often shocking stories, but at how someone could experience such a strange cocktail of brutality and magic, and emerge with such a boundless, joyful imagination. This book is more than a collection of memories. It's a blueprint for how a creative spirit is forged. The most powerful lesson here is about resilience, but not in the conventional sense. Dahl doesn't just endure his childhood hardships, he transforms them. The tyrannical Mrs. Pratchett doesn't just become a bad memory, she becomes the archetype for all the glorious villains he'd later create, like Miss Trunchbull and Matilda. The cruel beatings and absurd rules of the boarding school system don't break his spirit. They fuel a lifelong suspicion of pompous authority, a theme running through nearly every book he wrote. He took the vinegar of his life and transformed it into literary gold. This reminds us that the most significant parts of our own stories are often the most difficult ones. The moments of injustice, the painful experiences, the encounters with cruel people, these aren't just things to survive and forget. They're the very soil from which our deepest understanding, empathy, and unique perspective can grow. Dahl teaches us that our wounds can become our wisdom. So how can we bring a little of this magic into our own lives? Here are a few practical ideas. First, become the storyteller of your own life. Start noticing the small, vivid moments that make up your days. The funny, the strange, the frustrating. Dahl says these stories remained seared on my memory for 60 years. What moments from your life are seared onto yours? Write them down. Not as a dry diary entry, but as a story. Find the hero, the villain, the humor, the lesson. By doing this, you're not just recording your life, you're beginning to shape its meaning. Second, cultivate a healthy sense of mischief. Dahl's pranks, like the mouse in the sweet jar, or the goat droppings in the pipe, were never truly cruel. They were acts of rebellion against pomposity, meanness, and injustice. This isn't about causing harm. It's about refusing to let the world's seriousness crush your spirit. It's about finding playful, clever ways to challenge the status quo and remind yourself, and others, not to take everything so seriously. Finally, recognize the two worlds we all live in. Like Dahl, we have our boarding schools, the places of duty, responsibility, and rules. But we also need our Norway, the places of freedom, play, love, and magic. Whether it's a hobby, a group of friends, or time spent in nature, it's essential to have a space where you can escape the world's pressures and reconnect with the joyful, mischievous part of yourself. That's the part that fuels everything else. Roald Dahl's childhood shows us that a life of extraordinary creativity isn't built in a sterile, perfect environment. It's built from the messy, chaotic, beautiful, and sometimes painful reality of being human. It's a reminder that within our own memories, our own stories, lie the seeds of who we're destined to become. That was our journey through Boy, Tales of Childhood by Roald Dahl. We've covered the highlights today, but here's the truth. A summary, no matter how detailed, is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. The real adventure begins when you step onto the path yourself. The true magic of this book lives in Dahl's own voice, in the way he makes you feel the pounding of his heart as he drops that mouse into the jar, and the sting of the cane on his backside. If any of these tales have sparked something in you, I encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's about feeling the thrill of a memory so vivid it becomes your own. And it might just change the way you look at the stories of your own life. You can find a link to the book in the description below. And if this exploration has brought you some value today, a simple click on the like button and a subscription to Billionaire's Bookshelf would mean the world. It ensures you won't miss our next adventure into another book that has the power to shape a life. Let's continue this journey of growth together.